How to write an email, part 2, the content moves. And the content for the email that we're going to write is a polite request. So we've got the frame for our email, and that's pretty standard. So now let's look at this blue area. What do we want to achieve with our email? What are we trying to get done? Well, we're asking for something. And in English, there are many ways to ask for something. There are many words that you can use. Here is a list of examples for asking for feedback on your work. Now, I hope you can see that all of these are asking for the same thing, but some of these are more appropriate. Some of these are more polite. The ones at the top, the easier ones, the shorter ones, are actually not very appropriate. Why is this? Well, the ones at the top are more direct. And in English, being direct is not considered polite. Being more indirect is considered more polite. It's possible to be very, very indirect by implying what you mean. I certainly need help is a way of asking for help, I suppose, but it's extremely indirect. You could probably think of some more examples, but what principles can we use to make a good choice? Well, a good choice will get us what we want, and a bad choice will not get us what we want. Any of the direct examples are not likely to get us what we want, so we will cross these out. The implied ones are a little bit ambiguous, a little bit vague, a little bit unclear, and may or may not get us what we want. So, from a strategic point of view, this group here, the indirect questions, would be the best choice. And notice that there are two parts to these questions. There is what you want to achieve, correct my paper. Then there's the indirect request. Not please correct my paper, but can you correct my paper? Or would you mind correcting my paper? Or is it okay to ask for you to correct my paper? So that's fairly simple. Let's go a little bit deeper. We can make these indirect questions even more polite. And one way to do this is by embedding the clause. If you're not sure what a clause is, you can see that on another video here. Simply put, a clause is a subject and a verb. So for example, can you is a clause. We can add another clause, I wonder, subject, verb, and we can combine these together to make a new sentence. I wonder if you can correct my paper. This is the first clause. This is the second clause. Notice the change in word order from the original indirect question. This is not a question anymore. Can you is a question, whereas you can is not a question. This is something that takes a long time for learners of English to master. Another way we can add more politeness to our sentence is to change the tense. Generally speaking, past tense is considered more polite than present tense. So for example, I wonder if you can This is present tense. We can change this to be, I wondered if you could. I wondered if you could correct my paper. We can also change the aspect. And by using the progressive aspect, we can make it more polite still. I was wondering if you could correct my paper. So this is one way you can modify the question to make it even more polite. Another way to do this is to change the person. If we talk about you, could you do something? This is considered less polite than we. Could we do something? And this is considered less polite than I. And this is considered less polite than an impersonal it. So rather than could you do something, we could say, is it possible to do something? We can combine this with our previous ideas. Here is one example. I was wondering if we could meet to discuss the issues in my work. Another example is, I wonder if it is possible to ask you to correct my paper. There is one further way we can modify these sentences to make them even more polite. These are called downtoners, and they make the request seem smaller. They soften the request. They're largely adverbs, and by adding one of these, usually after the subject of the sentence, we can make the request seem smaller than it is. So for example, could you, by any chance, take a look at my paper? Or combined with the above ideas, I wonder if it is at all possible to ask for my paper to be corrected. So each of these ideas are quite simple in themselves, but when we combine them, we get quite a complicated sentence, but we get a very subtle effect. So here is your main strategy. We have some options, and we have to make a choice based on what we are asking for. How polite do we need to be? What are we asking for? How big is the imposition? How much trouble does it cause the teacher? Does the teacher need to do something for you? Does he have to give his time and his energy? How much time? How much energy? Does this involve a risk for the teacher? Is the teacher doing something he shouldn't do? So when we're asking for permission, permission is very easy to give. It doesn't need a lot of time. So the imposition is quite small. But on the other hand, there may be risks involved. The first risk is if he agrees to let one student be absent, then he must allow other students to be absent. So while the first request is small, it creates a situation which might easily get out of hand. So that's the first risk. The second risk is that he might be violating the rules. Maybe he's not allowed to give permission. Maybe there's a very strict attendance policy. So we have to evaluate the size of the imposition. How much energy is required? How much risk is required? The greater the imposition, the more polite you need to be. Could you is a good start. I wonder if you could, that would be better. I was wondering if you could, better still. I was wondering if I could is even better. I was wondering if I could maybe. That sounds excellent. So, let's put this now into our email. We have our framing moves, we have our salutation, we have our self-introduction, but now we have our polite request. I was wondering if I could maybe ask for permission for an excused absence. We're not finished there. There is something else that we can do to increase our chances of success, but this is a very good start. In the next part, we will try to be more persuasive and try to convince the recipient to give us what we want.